Joe Scott, Michael Mendez, and Wade Crowfoot. Thank you. Perfect. Welcome. Have a seat. Welcome. This is an all-star panel on this topic, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the best audience on the West Coast and maybe in the whole country. I want to start first with you, Secretary Crowfoot. Wade, fire and water obviously have long been fundamental here in California, but what is changing right now as we speak in 2025 about the needs of this state and the dangers in the environment here?
It's a great question and an important first question. We know that climate change is accelerating across the planet, and that's having major impacts, these extreme events that are felt differently in different places. In California and the American West, that means growing risk of catastrophic wildfire. Now, it's important to point out wildfire is part of our natural environment, and it's important to our natural environment. But what's changed in recent years is the severity of the fire, the size and the intensity. That's driven by hotter temperatures in the winter, hotter temperatures in the summer, more prolonged periods of drought. And it's not just California and the American West that's experiencing this. This is places all over the world that share our similar climate. Now, the good news is, as we talk today, there is more focus than ever to build our resilience to wildfire. That means reducing the threat of this big, dangerous wildfire in a variety of means. Our state leaders have invested more than ever in supporting regional leaders to actually get projects in place around communities, in communities, to protect people and property from wildfire. And I'm looking forward to talking about that today.
Joe, you study this. What is the risk? Where is the risk? And I know you brought some visual aids as well to help us understand.
Yeah, and I've been working on that, identifying where the risk is and how to mitigate it for a long time now. And let's take a look at it's a little video loop of our work assessing fire probability across the state of California. So this is 2020, the burn probability. This is going to play through. This is the 2020 fire perimeters that happened after that. As we watch this, you'll see in 2021, where those fires occurred, the probability is now lower where those occurred. We're going to go to look at 2022 fire. That was the fire probability. Now here's what burned in 2021. And you see
it's a slow loop.
It is a slow loop.
It's okay.
Yeah, if it goes too fast, you don't quite see it.
That's right.
And really, this is what I've been studying and working with the federal government, with the state government, all over the West and all over the nation, actually. So even in New Jersey and the Northeast and the Southeast of the United States, we've been looking at that. So the idea being, so we'll see the 2023, it loops back.
Yeah.
We'll look at the next slide, and this is information that for at least 5 years, we have rolled up into this Wildfire Risk to Communities project. This is a project with the U.S. Forest Service and the Headwaters Economics, and the Pyrologics did the analysis and laid it out. And in the next slide, when we go, the last one that I have, is to show you, even from 5 years ago.
Wow.
Ashland, Oregon, 2020, suffered from the Almeda fire. Burned, I think it was about 2,000 houses. 97th percentile community, 5 years ago. Superior, Colorado. That was December 30th, 2021, the Marshall Fire, 92nd percentile community. Lahaina, this is what shocks everybody except, well, actually it didn't.
In Hawaii, yeah.
In Hawaii, right. In Hawaii, 98th percentile community at risk. And then, of course, just down south from here, Altadena, 100th percentile, meaning that there are really almost no communities that had a greater wildfire exposure than Altadena.
Wow. I want to try and experiment with this whole audience. This could go horribly wrong, but we'll give it a try. Thinking about your lives, let's say 15 years ago, could you raise your hand if 15 years ago you or someone you knew experienced wildfire danger personally, 15 years ago? Okay, some people. Now raise your hand if in the past year or two, in any time, in modern times, you've, like the past couple of years, you have, or someone you know has experienced wildlife danger. Yes, see, look at that. This audience shows exactly what you are talking about. So, Michael, I want to ask you, What populations especially are affected by this and how?
Very excellent question. Thank you for having me here today. I think the tools that you provide, Joe, are quite important, and the policy work that you're doing, Wade, is important, and they give local communities an idea of where we should target our resources. But also, some of these mappings and data do have limitations. They don't always understand or able to reveal where some of the most socially vulnerable populations are, such as migrant farm workers, which is communities, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, I've been working with since 2018 in places like Sonoma and Santa Barbara and Ventura County, and they have had disparate impact to these wildfires, particularly because state and federal and local government had not provided any type of resources to protect them from the wildfire smoke, let alone the impacts to their jobs and their health. So looking at the communities that are most vulnerable, such as farm workers, is quite important, and having relationships, building strong relationships with trusted organizations like migrant farm worker organizations is important, because oftentimes local government, because many of them are undocumented, don't really provide those targeted resources to this community, even if they've been in those communities for generations, if not decades. So my research really looks at how labor organizations, migrant rights organizations had filled that void when federal, state, and local government have not provided preparedness resources, let alone disaster recovery. And we've seen this throughout the wildfire cycles, particularly since wildfire season is year-round, and some of the peak wildfires happen at the same time as harvest. So there's an economic imperative to push farm workers out into the fields to harvest and try to save the crops before smoke taint or the fire itself destroys the harvest.
I hear you saying that there are groups that have tried to fill this void, but how much of the void have they been able to fill?
It's many of them are nonprofits,
Right.
migrant-serving organizations that already have shoestring budgets.
Right.
Being a disaster provider manager was never part of their mission. But since there's this huge policy gap at various governmental levels, they had to subsume that and become de facto emergency managers, de facto American Red Cross, because some organizations, particularly in 2017 fires, did not have any Spanish, let alone indigenous speakers. And particularly for indigenous migrants from Latin America, they have unique linguistic and social needs that are often overlooked, and they're homogenized with Spanish-speaking Mexican or Latin American migrants. So
They've had to contort.
Yes.
And they're trying to figure that out.
And creating this parallel network for
Right.
disaster aid and resources.
Wade, I want to ask you, let's move to the resilience conversation as part of this too. And I'm happy for this conversation to bounce around and follow your lead. You all know this better than anyone. But with resilience, for example, we know, we've heard a lot about the water supply in California. Where is the reservoir supply right now? And what do you need in terms of resilience?
Yeah. So we have been blessed by a really strong winter in California. We are Mediterranean climate, so we have a wet season or winter and then a long dry season. And so we need the winter to produce a lot of rain and snow. If that doesn't happen, we slip into a drought, and if that doesn't happen over successive years, we're in a big challenge. Good news is this last winter has been somewhat similar to the last couple of winters. Our reservoirs are full, above average. We have more water than we usually have. As we like to spend a lot of time this winter explaining our water situation in California regarding reservoirs in the north and the way that we distribute water had nothing to do with those horrific wildfires in Los Angeles. So that bears repeating. But I think it's really important to take a step back and explain what we need to do. So California celebrates our 175th anniversary this year.
Wow.
And prior to statehood, there was a lot of landscape managing happening across California. Our Native American communities, for thousands of years, actually proactively managed the landscapes with low-level managed fire. So much so that when folks like John Muir came to California, they said the landscapes up north were almost park-like. You could walk a horse through the forest. Well, that wasn't wilderness untouched by people. People had been managing landscapes for a very long time. Over most of the last 175 years, our state, as well as other states, has followed a policy of excluding fire from the landscapes. And that's dangerous because wildfire is part of the ecology and the environment. What that means is that we have portions of our state that are very dense in terms of the forests. And when there is wildfire, they catch so hot and so fast that you take a small fire and it becomes a very large fire. We experienced that in 21 and 22. So what do we need to do about it? We need to actually get back on the landscape to restore landscape health. So that means more of this prescribed fire, this low-level safe fire, cultural fire led by our Native American communities. That's a big part of it. It also means reducing density of certain areas of our forest, reducing the density of vegetation. It means putting fuel breaks around our communities that give wildfire firefighters a chance to protect communities. Almost a third of Californians live in high hazard zones, like Altadena, where you have a city or a town and it butts up against an open space that can bring the wildfire. So protecting around those communities is really important. There's a lot we need to do in communities too. California has the strongest defensible space requirements in the country, meaning you need to create some space to defend your home, removing shrubs and trees, as well as really strong building standards. But we need to continue to strengthen those moving forward. The good news is that over the last several years, billions of dollars have turned into thousands of projects that are happening across the state. And CAL FIRE, which is part of our agency, has been documenting where those upfront projects are actually impacting fire behavior. And the good news is that we're seeing that those upfront resilience investments, those projects, are actually making a difference, allowing firefighters to stop that catastrophic wildfire or to protect communities. Now we just need to continue and frankly do more of it.
Nature and man live on different timelines. I saw you nodding to a lot. Both of you were nodding to what Wade said. What do you see as what needs to happen here? And let me throw in a controversial idea. Do people need to change where they live?
I actually thought about that exact question a lot when I flew in last night, and I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. No, but here's why. If we avoided high hazard earthquake areas, we wouldn't be here right now. What we've learned to do with earthquakes, we can learn to do with wildfires, which is to build to resist them. And maybe that's the segue that I needed to talk about something.
Please.
We're here on a resilience panel, and I'm a fire ecologist, which means that I study the interrelationships between plants and animals and wildfire. Through that lens, there are several adaptations that species have to fire. Resilience is one of them. It's not the most important one for us to focus on, actually. Resilience first requires that we suffer a disaster, and then we recover from it. What we really want in fire ecology is resistance. We want to tolerate fire. We want to be able to experience it and not suffer that disaster, and then be able to recover if we do have that. And if you think about tree species,
Find the balance.
find the balance. Okay, I'll skip through.
No,
resistance
don't.
is aspen and resilience is aspen and lodgepole pine. They can suffer. They can be burned to the ground and they come right back. That's their adaptation. Giant sequoia and ponderosa pine in the Sierra Nevada, those resist fire. There's one species that I thought of yesterday, it's very nearby here, that is both resistant and resilient, and it's the coast redwood. Sequoia sempervirens, always living. It's
fascinating.
It's hard to harm, and if you do happen to harm it, it comes right back.
Okay. My heart is happy to hear this. I told you all backstage, my father studied to be a forester. That's what he wanted to do before he had to go to war. But he was a dendrologist. I've got his dendrology textbook, so this is making me very happy. So, Michael, I want to ask you, in looking at the populations here and at looking at what's happening environmentally, I've heard you talk, or I've seen you talk a little bit about where we are going. And it seems like, tell me if this is right, but fill this out. The idea from averting climate effects to maybe mitigating them. Are we now reacting to them? Where are we? What's happening?
We're in a moment where we need to do all of the above. But we can't do just mitigation. In the 2000s and 2010s, it was focused on mitigation. But the reality that the extreme weather events, extreme climatic events are happening now, and largely low income and communities of color at the front line. And as a social ecologist, literally in the School of Social Ecology, we really understand that, and I really enjoy what you said, is that while there's natural hazards, there are not natural disasters. So essentially, disasters are the lack of government intervention in an issue, just as you mentioned, earthquake. Looking at differences in casualties and damage between a place like Japan and Haiti. And in terms of the investment in infrastructure to protect communities.
And what does that tell you? What do you see in those differences?
To protect our hard assets, our hospitals, our roads, of course, and the general population, but also to identify those that are most vulnerable, even doing all the resiliency upgrades, making our homes resilient to fire, to earthquakes, to flooding, but also looking at socially vulnerable populations, our elderly. My father is on home dialysis. And if an earthquake or a wildfire, which he lives in a wildfire zone, he got evacuated just in the recent LA fires. And that was just an ordeal, me being a little farther away from him and seeing my brother and sister having to do that. So how do we identify people that are low income, elderly, don't speak, English is not their first language, and they don't understand the emergency alerts, or they don't get them? Or if they're undocumented, they're not trusting of going to the shelters or seeking assistance, because we do see cases where there are law enforcement. So not only making our communities, our hard assets, our physical buildings resilient, thinking beyond property and thinking beyond property values to the social context to protect communities.
The longer view.
The longer.
I want to ask you all sort of a group question.
Yeah.
Do you think that the public is aware of the real dangers right now of where our environment is, to the degree, and kind of ask you one by one a yes or no? Joe, yes or no? Is the public aware of the gravity of the situation?
Not fully.
Okay. Michael?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. Wade?
I'll say in California, yes. I mean, we just saw the poll that you did, and you look at public opinion in California. I think Californians very much connect the dots between climate change and these threats. And this is a real and present danger. So right now, I was so appreciative of listening to Attorney General Bonta. We have leaders in Washington, D.C., I'm going to be frank, that would have us stick our head in the sand in terms of what we're facing. They just essentially fired all of the climate scientists across the country for this federal climate assessment, which is really just taking science and downscaling it to help community leaders understand the threats that they face. We have major cuts across the Forest Service in California. Half of California's landmass is owned and managed by the federal government. So from my perspective, in California, our residents get it, which is taking action on wildfire resilience, on climate change, is about protecting not only families and communities now, but our future. I think Californians get it.
I have to come back to a statistic you just said that needs to be highlighted. 50%, right, of California's, open space you said, California's is federal government land. Wow.
Yeah, and 57% of our forests. So we have certain political leaders, criticizing California. I can tell you, California state government has spent more funding to actually manage our federal forests than the federal government has over the last decade.
Really?
Yeah. So from our perspective, that's not to malign the work that's happening within California. We have great forester partners on the ground. But I can tell you, these recent budget cuts and these mass firings, they took away 10% of the workforce, including in 18 national forests in California, 25% of the non-wildfire workforce. What that means are those thousands of projects that were getting done across California, if they're on federal land with federal participation, they're either not going to happen or happen more slowly. So, yeah.
I see you nodding, Michael.
Yes, but I maybe push back a little bit about the California perspective of the preparedness. I think it really goes by income level of, and if you're a property owner, of how prepared you see. I've seen instances of, lower income people that, particularly in Sonoma, could not get out of the fire zone areas because they didn't have enough gas and the gas stations were closed. Or they were on the beach because they didn't know where to go to shelter, or they were afraid to go to some of the shelters. So the state is doing some great things. The Office of Emergency Services does have a targeted program called Listos Campaign that is trying to do work, but it's still underfunded. And with the federal cuts, that's going to be only intensified. So I'm worried about other places beyond just California where this is going to happen. I was one of the climate scientists that got removed from the National Climate Assessment and also removed by an advisory committee for FEMA. And those were quite important for places outside of California. But even within California, there are remote areas or there are populations living in the shadows that we need to do a better job in reaching them and making sure that they understand the severity of these impending and compounding fire disasters. Because in the 2020, we had the pandemic, we had fires, and we had heat waves all happening at once. So imagine that sort of stress that individuals were encountering in places throughout California that experienced fires.
What was that experience like? Did you get an email out of the blue when you were removed from these positions? Had you expected it?
We had expected it.
Right.
We were disappointed.
Was it an email or how were you notified?
We had a webinar first.
Not a
webinar.
You will be removed webinar? No.
Okay. That things were winding down.
I see.
And the federal workers were very mum. They couldn't directly tell us what was happening. It was very coded. You did have scientists in tears at the federal level. That were
on this webinar.
That worked for the federal government for decades and dedicated their life to public service. It was a scene, and me being in the privileged place of California, having great policy leaders like Wade and scientists as well, but still understanding the impact this is going to happen in places like deep red places that could have used this information to address some of the disproportionate impacts of climate change.
Joe, you work in the public sector and the private sector. How do you see what's happening in the federal government right now in this area? Obviously there are many arguments the Trump administration's making for what they say they're doing, but what do you see as the effects here? And are there efficiencies needed? They say, the government's not working. We need to make it more efficient. Does it need to be more efficient? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I feel more pressure on me in the private sector. If the public sector isn't going to be carrying the ball down the field as much, then I've lost a partner. And
a powerful one, a strong one.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we've already been doing that in a way of one of the things that we like to do, in addition to showing where the hazard is to really look in fine detail about what can you do about it and where can you do something about it. And we get to the level of when we do our modeling of embers, which we all know that's a lot of how houses can ignite in wildfires. So we track where are they produced on the landscape in the wild?
Really?
The ones that land on buildings, we know where they came from, so we can target those areas for mitigation. And then we also look to identify places on the landscape where slowing down fire is optimal, where reducing the spread rate will have the greatest effect at reducing the likelihood that fire will go on and do harm, but we can also allow the fires that aren't doing harm. We don't have to deal with those. So we're, for quite a while now, we've been pioneering alongside, not with the government partners sometimes, but alongside them, and that they can use what we're building to help prioritize their work.
But you're nervous that now there'll be a disconnect and there won't be...
Or that we'll build all this great stuff and there's no market for it and nobody can use it.
Yeah, and I'll say, make no mistake, we need to be more efficient protecting people from wildfire and restoring the health of landscapes. And so we're working to do that at the state, helping good projects happen more quickly, cutting red tape. And we appreciate federal efforts to do that. But I'll tell you that the way that the last few months have unfolded, it's really hard to draw connections between these actions and improved efficiencies or moving quicker. It seems like it's much more of a sledgehammer versus a scalpel. I'm so excited with all of this technology being developed. I mean, our partners across the country are doing incredible things. We have artificial intelligence that's now being used on over 1,000 cameras on strategic ridge tops across California.
Really?
We used to have a person actually staff looking at the screens of those 1,000 cameras. Now we have artificial intelligence that picks up anomalies in those screens when it determines that there's smoke, that then immediately calls the local fire unit. And in the first couple months alone, we had dozens of fires that were spotted and called into minutes and sometimes over an hour before somebody actually picked up the phone and called 911. But the challenge is we need an active federal partner. We need, state and federal partnerships. And there continues to be good people on the ground, but they need that support from leadership in Washington, D.C. to do the work.
We are here in Silicon Valley right now. I want to talk about corporations and the wealthy in general. Have you found them to be more thoughtful and innovative in this area, or have you found them to be more focused on their own short-term needs and maybe profits? I'm not trying to say that with a weight on the scale. I just want to know what they're doing, and are they having a positive, constructive effect?
I'll jump in and say, philanthropy is some of our best partners for what it's worth. A lot of this...
Is that corporates? No, what are we talking about?
Well, some of them are very, very wealthy individuals or corporations that then turn some of their resources, their wealth, into philanthropic, work. But I'll also say there are private companies, and I can say including commercial timber companies in California that are really focused on building resilience. They understand that huge areas of California burning up is not good for their companies either. So I actually don't think that there's a lot of ideological debate right now in terms of what we need to do on wildfire resilience. I do think it's about fundamentally shifting the paradigm and getting a lot more work done.
Mm-hmm. I would add some of the technological innovations in terms of citizen science, open data, Purple Air, for example.
Can you explain Purple Air?
Purple Air is a low-cost air quality sensor that primarily looks at particulate matter 2.5, which is smaller than a width of hair that can get lodged in your lungs, and obviously a lot of PM 2.5 is produced at wildfire smoke. And places like Sonoma, we use data from the Sonoma fires, and we tracked the uptake, the adoption of Purple Air in Sonoma County from 2017 to 2020. And it was at least 100% from those 3 years. And
Really?
Sonoma County, at least the last time we did the check, had the highest adoption of these low-cost sensors of anywhere in the country because of the fires. And that has really opened up the general public's eyes, those individuals that could afford that, put in their businesses or their homes. And I think that's changed the dialogue about how wildfires impact human health. And we saw that with the greater LA fires. There was such an emphasis on how toxic wildfire smoke. And wildfire smoke is several times more toxic to human respiratory health than breathing in car exhaust. So we all know if you breathe...
Wait, can you say that again?
Because
that's an astounding fact.
Wildfire smoke is several times more harmful to human respiratory health than breathing in car exhaust. So if you live next to a freeway, you know that's going to be harmful to you. But wildfire smoke is a toxic mix of heavy metals, burning structures, literally cars, and other household chemicals. And they all mix together, and you breathe them in. So that discussion, too, is how wildfire smoke is impacting, is been on people's minds, in part because of the innovation happening in California with these air quality sensors.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
I'm coming back to actually something that Wade said, because I don't disagree with any of that at all. And you talked about, getting the work done, and I say it's time to get dirty. We've been assessing the hazard for a while. We know where it is. We kind of know what to do. We know what communities need help doing it. It's time to do it. And we've all heard the phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We do a lot of strategizing about what to do about this problem. And what we really need, we know we'll have succeeded when we have a different culture than we have right now, a different attitude toward fire. And we're moving toward that. It's going to be really, really slow. But we really need to have a culture of fire adaptation where every one of us is aware of what can and can't cause a fire when. And we're free to tell our neighbors that, hey, the chain is dragging on your trailer brakes and that could start a fire. And all these little things that used to be, you'd go for a drive in the woods in the Sierra in the summer and you'd always had a shovel and a bucket with you. And we've lost that, even though right now it's more important than ever to every one of us to be super aware of the wildfire issue.
I
Final
couldn't
thought?
agree
Yeah.
more. And if we think back to the mid-1970s, with the energy crisis and the oil embargo, energy efficiency hasn't been hard baked into our culture for a century. It was really the last, decades where we understood that, when you left a room, you turned off the lights. Energy efficiency is sort of baked into the way we do our work. I have a 10-year-old, and you better believe it, when she leaves the house, she has to turn off the lights. We teach our kids that. Joe's right. Everybody has a role to play. There's a program called Firewise Communities, and the idea is getting your community, building that culture within your community. And I'm really proud in California, we just celebrate our 1,000th Firewise community, because that's what it's going to take. Yes, government, yes, private investment, but it's really communities that are going to build their resilience.
I have to thank you all so much. I know we also want to talk about Prop 4. I'll just mention that. I'm sorry we didn't get to that, but this has been such an astounding and informative conversation. And I've learned a lot that's reframed my thinking also, too. So Wade Crofett, Michael Mendez, and Joe Scott, I have to thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Here we go. Here we go. Thank you.